we need to look at another person in this. Who is Herod? Who is Herod in this passage? You know, in the New Testament, there are a lot of Herods. And it's kind of hard to keep track of them. The most important one it would be Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great was in charge when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and he had all the innocent children, 2 years and under, slaughtered. He was a Roman appointed king. So he is the king over all of Israel, but he himself was not a Jew. Most likely historians say that he was an Edomite. And so he was in charge from 34 BC until 4 AD. And that temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. He had 10 wives that produced many, many children. Herod Antipas. And he will be involved in when Jesus goes to trial. He will be involved in that. And so Herod Antipas is less powerful than Herod the Great. And he ruled over Galilee. And so he's not a king, but he's a tetrarch. And if you look up the word tetrarch, what you'll find out is he ruled over about 1/4 of Israel. And so he wanted to be a king. He actually tried to declare himself to be a king. He had his people call him king, but as far as Rome was concerned, he was not a king. And so he who had John the Baptist beheaded in this passage. So, that is not directly related to Jesus, because that's why the gospel writers write. It's about Jesus. And so John was arrested because of his preaching. The so-called King of Galilee, the Tetrarch, he was preaching to them about his immortal leader to do that. Now, we have people who are to do that today, but not in that day. They would not do that because it would usually count them their heads, and they would have to die for saying that. The Baptist spoke to Herod and told him he was a sinful man. And I want to give you reasons why John the Baptist said this. First of all, because he was already married. He was already married when he married Herodias. He married the daughter of another king, is who he married, whose kingdom bordered his kingdom. And so when Herod got rid of his first wife, of this king, and you can read about historical books. So he marries this woman, the name of Herodias. But here's and he left her husband, and so they both left their spouses so that they could be married. The third thing of the husband was, that makes things interesting when you have all of these, isn't it? And the last thing is it was wrong was because she was his niece. She was his niece. And many of the previous prophets had reigning kings, and they paid a price for what they were doing when they sinned against God. And so prophets were sent to God to do one thing, well, to do many things, but one of the big things was to hold the leaders morally responsible for their actions. That's why God gave the prophets of the Old Testament. They directly went to the kings and told them when they were morally wrong. And so if our leaders are more immoral and can get away with it, here's what happens. It will change, and it does change our standards for everything and for everyone. And God knew that. And so when Jesus spoke against Herod, Jesus himself calls him a fox. And a fox means this: he's crafty, he's deceitful, and he's lowly. So in 8:15, which we have not got there yet in Mark, it says, and Jesus warned them, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that Herod. He calls him that Herod. And so he specifically tells his disciples to watch out for Herod's leaven. And he's talking about the negative effect that Herod would have on the people because he would not obey the law. And so calling for moral reform is walking in the footsteps of Jesus. Whenever that happens today, it is walking in his footsteps. And it is happening. Do you know that? It happens every day. We have people who are speaking out about it. Why? Because it affects that the leaders have on people. And so we're called out, we're to call them out on their moral sin. I was watching the news this morning of a young mother who had called some of the members of members of the school board because of what they were putting into place, and she was sued by the school. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and yesterday John had an ownership. Herod to listen and to teach, even when he was preaching against Herod himself and his wicked behavior. And so Herod, and you know, that kind of stuff gets out there in the community. So John says this: I can stop that going around. I'll just arrest the guy, put him in prison, and therefore I don't have all this to talk about. That's what he does to Herod and here he's interested in what John has to say, but when John says it, he's bothered by what he says. And like Herod, there are many people who are not interested in obeying what they hear about from God's word. They like to hear it. They're almost entertained by it. You know, let's go see what the so-and-so has to say about God. And so they see an entertainment in the gospel. And but the thing is this: they want to put it in its place. You have the gospel, but we have this about our lives, and we live that. And so they don't want to hear a gospel that says, if you're going to follow Jesus, he's going to take over your life. That's the only way he's going to do it. But they feel the need for religion. Now, how do I know that? Because there are people outside of these walls who feel for a need for religion, but they don't want to follow Jesus. And they show up on Christmas Eve. And they say, you know, what would Christmas be without going to Christmas Eve service? You know, and if the churches wouldn't offer a Christmas Eve service, then it just wouldn't be the same. So they need God for Christmas, the same thing they need for Easter. What would Easter be without God? Right? And then when it comes to a funeral, and one of their loved ones died, and you just hear them speaking around the casket, oh, they're in a better place. And I have to bite my tongue at this point to say, how do you know? You don't even believe in God. At least your life doesn't show it. But they need God at that point, and they kind of, you know, they just kind of hem-haw around him. And the As we look at Herod's life, everything about his life is wrong. It's wrong. Now he has his stepdaughter dancing seductively for entertainment for the nobles that are in attendance at this interview. She's probably a teenager and at the age of marriage. So why doesn't Herod just say, if you do a good job, I'll give you such and such a thing? But he doesn't. He doesn't say, I'll give you this reward. And it's not just his dance that he comes and he says, whatever you want, up to half of my kingdom, I'll give to you for the seductive dance that you've just done in front of me. And so you know what she said.